Hey there, comic fam. Welcome back to Climbing Comics. So, today we'll be talking a little bit about storage. Hey there, comic fam. Thanks for joining me again today. So, today I wanted to talk a little bit about some things that I wish I knew when I first started collecting. And these are just my own preferences, disclaimer. So you don't necessarily have to do it this way, but I found that this works for me and I wanted to share some of this information with you. So, one thing I'll start off with is when I went to the comic book shop, a lot of times I would go there and they would give me a plastic bag. And certain comic book shops, you had to pay for bags and boards or bag and board them separately. For some, if you have a pull list or a subscription, sometimes they'll bag and board them for you before they put them in the box. Some other places don't bag and board them, and you have to buy bags and boards at the shop. So there's lots of different shops that you can go to, and there's lots of different styles in which each of these stores follow. So what I came to realize is that it was not really safe for me to put books in bags and boards and then into another plastic bag, throw that into my car. Things would kind of slide around. So after a while, I came to realize that a lot of people would come into these comic shops with what looked like this little box. So I found out this thing was called a Storefolio. So this, I'll show you my Storefolio. So this is essentially a box where you put your comic books in. So I usually bag and board them and then put them into this box. So it's this box. I have a couple of my stickers on here with Shredder, Gambit, and Spider-Gwen, and you could tell that this is from last year when they had some of this Absolute Carnage crossover summer thing going on. So inside of this box, it's actually magnetized on this side, and then you open it up, and if you look at the other side, you have your books in there. So the way that I've stored my books in here, and I would say that for me, I put about max 10 in here. So the way that I put my books in here is actually front to back, the same way that I store my books in my short boxes at home. So yeah, so you could see that they're front to back. So essentially the spines don't really stack on top of each other, because what I've heard and read and from other people's experiences is that sometimes you get a spine roll that way. So I have these books together here. You can see I'm actually reading Red Mother, or catching up with Red Mother here. So this is my Storefolio, which I always bring to every comic shop. And this is actually a really good thing to have if you ever go to cons, or if you ever... The last year I actually went to a Berkeley comic show. I brought this, and this was perfect for that, right? Because if you buy some books that may be of value to you, you don't want them kind of sliding around, or kind of, if you drop it, you drop the box, not necessarily the books inside. I try to make sure that I have a couple of empty bags and boards inside the box itself, just in case I go to a shop that doesn't necessarily have their own bags and boards. And I'll tell you later, I actually specifically have a reason to have bags and boards separately from the books itself, because that's kind of how I read my books. So you could see from these bags and boards, I actually retape them with blue painter's tape. Definitely thank you to Reggie Collects for some of that sage advice. I luckily, knock on wood, have not had the issue of where I try to pull the book out and then the tape sticks to the cover. Luckily that hasn't happened, because what I tend to do now is either just fully remove the piece of tape and then rebag and reboard, or fully remove the piece of tape, take out the book, read it, put the book back in, and then retape it. That's just kind of how I've avoided having anything stick to the covers. And I think I just want to avoid any issues with having anything stick to the cover. And for me, I have tested putting some of the blue painter's tape, and sometimes it does stick. You do still have to be careful. Depends on what type of book it is, but it's not quite as sticky as the Scotch tape that I use. But yeah, that's one thing. So 2 things that I mentioned. I have this Storefolio, and I actually bag and board and put them front to back from each other. So one of the reasons why I do have extra bags and boards, and I'm going to use this just kind of as an example. I have this out of the bags and board already. This is one West Coast Adventures number 8. So what I would normally do, all right, let's say I have this Thor. I would take it out, actually put one bag and board on one side, and this is my empty bag and board. So before I read, I would actually hold it up in the middle like this, so I don't touch the the front or back cover, and I would actually page through it. And my goal is I would try not to open the book super wide, because I didn't want any stress on that spine. So I would actually only open up to a certain degree, maybe 45 degrees or so, and then page through it and read them. That's because my hands get kind of sweaty, and I didn't want to damage the book that way. And especially if I'm sliding them in and out and kind of have oils on my hands and whatnot. That's just how I did it. I know a lot of people don't do that. They like the look and feel of the book itself. I do love paging through this myself. The smell of the books actually remind me of, to be honest, I remember my grandma reading comics. So they were Filipino comics, and she would actually read them. She read them so many times that all of them would be tattered, it would rip off the staple and stuff like that. So it's kind of fun remembering certain tidbits about older family members that way. So this is one way in which I read my comics, live from the floppy. Another way I actually read is through my tablet. So I have a tablet here, and I actually use Marvel Unlimited. So for example, I'm going to pull one up. Here's Spider-Man number 20, and you could page through them. And what I like about this is you could actually double tap, and then you just go through panel by panel, right? You go through panel. And this is kind of nice. I actually use my tablet essentially when I'm either traveling or going to a place where I know that I can't necessarily read my books, but I do know that I'm going to have some time on my hands to do some reading. For example, if I go to if I go on a family trip or something like this, and I know there's going to be some downtime, I definitely bring this instead of the floppies. During that time, I have my personal list in Marvel Unlimited and DC Universe, where you could pick and choose books that you could essentially read offline. If you don't have internet access, you could read certain things offline because it downloads them onto your tablet or whatever reading device you have. So this is how I really catch up on a lot of the older books. And kind of to call back on one of my goals for this year is I'm really trying to read a lot of either the first appearances or the early ASMs, because for me, if I want to be able to tie the books that I read with the actual books that I collect and pull into my collection. So outside of this, there are a couple of things that I want to talk about as well in terms of home storage, right? So I have not yet gone into collecting enough to have many long boxes, but I did start with what I had hoped to be 2 to 3 short boxes. That has multiplied at least 3 to 4-fold. I first started with BCW cardboard boxes. Those were great. And then I went to the art boxes. So these are the ones where there's prints of different characters or different comic book series on the actual cardboard itself. It's pretty cool. It's really good to look at. It's fun to have that in your collection. The problem there is once my collection grew, I started to stack those books, and due to limited space, I would actually stack the cardboard boxes on top of another, right? So like I mentioned before, with my Storefolio, I put all my books back and forth just so the spines are not on the same side, and I don't max out and pack the Storefolio. I max out at about 10, but I know you could put a couple more books in there. I store my books the same way in my short boxes, where they're all front to back, and I don't stuff each of the boxes, right? Some of these boxes could hold up to maybe 120 books, but I kind of, go 20 down. So in terms of storage in my short boxes, I always put empty bags and boards in the front of the box and the back of the box. So essentially, when you put your hands into those handles like that stick out, I've seen issues where one, you reach in and then you could scratch that front book. And then two, I've actually seen this from, and I've talked to a couple of my comic shop owners, you could actually get sun damage from books that are kind of stored out where it's pretty sunny. And you kind of see that like little oval shape and kind of discoloration with that front comic. So I end up putting a couple bags and boards in the front of that box and in the back. So when I reach in through those holes, I don't damage the book and there's no light coming in. So once I started collecting more and more books, I started stacking them on top of each other. Inside these boxes, I have these plastic dividers. And these dividers essentially are separations for different sections of my my collection and how I organize, right? So I'll organize by book name or series and then put the title on that little flap that sticks up. What I noticed is that flap kind of got smushed down each time I kept stacking boxes on top. Luckily, it hasn't smushed down to the point where it's actually touching the books itself, but it's getting pretty close, right? So what I ended up doing is and I'll show you a little bit of a picture of this. In order to, balance out the weight, I actually added a couple of Gemini shippers on top of the box. So I would have short box, Gemini shipper, short box, Gemini shipper, short box, Gemini shipper. And so I would have two stacks on top of each other. Like I'd have one short box here, one short box here, then Gemini, Gemini, short box, Gemini, Gemini. So I was trying to distribute the weight. That helped for a little bit, but then I kept getting more books. So I more recently, about 2 months ago, switched to the plastic BCW storage boxes. So I originally had a couple of the plastic BCW storage boxes only for my slabs. And this was because they were the right size. So I got that. I wanted to make sure that I protect my slabs, and I got the plastic case. And after a while, like the cases have little notches on top of each other, on the top of them. So you could stack multiple BCW plastic boxes on top of each other. And since it's so sturdy, I did not have any fear of anything being damaged on the bottom, right? So if I stack 4, and I think it's max 3 or 4 short BCW plastic boxes on top of each other, I had no worry with the bottom box. So I started converting all of my storage for my books into these BCW plastic boxes, and I am not probably going to turn back. I really love the art on these cardboard boxes, and I know it's corrugated cardboard, then they're like double-sided, but it still just wasn't enough based off of how my collection was growing, and I wanted to make sure I keep my books safe. So those are the couple ways in which I store my books. I wish I knew this early on, because in terms of storage, it's a lot of overhead, right? If I have, like, for example, 10 cardboard short boxes are not overly expensive, but if you try to convert 10 short boxes to the plastic BCW boxes, that could be quite a bit of money. So in terms of what you want to do, I definitely have looked online for sales. If there's anything, like if you work with your LCS, to try to buy through them, or if you buy through your buy directly through the BCW website, you could definitely check for different opportunities to buy in bulk, right? So in terms of how I read and how I store, this is just a little bit of a snippet of my progress throughout this past, I would say, year and a half of getting back into comics. And I think this is something that other people might have different opinions about how they store, but this is how I store, and this is how I read, and this is how I transport my books. So if you guys have any type of feedback in terms of what you've seen work or not work, this is just based off of my experience. I want to hear from you. So please definitely let me know how how you store books, and if you have any recommendations for me. And again, this is definitely a journey in my comic book collecting, and even the small things like storage. You need to be able to scale up, especially with a hobby like this. So definitely from my comic journey to yours, store safe. Thanks all. Bye.